1874. Wind draped itself over the edge of Juniper Ridge like a tired ghost, trailing dust in the low scrub and rattling the thorn bushes that dotted the brittle land. The sky above Weaver's Hollow was too wide, too blue, too unbothered by the woman walking alone down the narrow trail, carved by cattle hooves and rain. Her boots sank half an inch with each step, the ground softened not by water but by the weight of drought and time. Clara Bellamy's coat hung limp off her shoulders. It had once belonged to her brother, and even now the cuffs bore his name stitched in crooked thread. He'd been gone nearly 3 years, fever or war, no one could say, and she still wore it when her heart was low and her name was lower. The wool held the scent of ash and wind, and sometimes when she closed her eyes she imagined it smelled like home. She hadn't eaten since morning, hadn't spoken to a soul in 2 days. The town had a way of closing its doors without latching them. You could still walk inside, still trade coin for bread or meat, but you'd feel the air change, see eyes slide past you like you weren't worth the weight of their word. She'd done nothing but be born to the wrong name, carry the wrong past, wear her grief without apology. Ahead the trail sloped toward a sun-withered fence, its rails cracked and graying like old bones. Beyond it stretched the Keating Ranch, some 3,000 acres of stubborn dirt, barbed wire, and scrub cattle barely worth their weight in winter. She'd been warned about coming this way. They said the man who ran it didn't take kindly to trespassers or women with a history like hers, but she was out of options. The money she'd earned cleaning dishes at the saloon was gone, slipped from her hands as fast as they'd let her through the kitchen door. Rumors clung to her like nettles, some true, most not, and all of them sharp enough to cut. She'd been cast out of her cousin's house in Hastings, shunned from the church in Fair Creek, and chased out of the boarding house in Red Gulch when someone recognized her face from a wanted poster that had been taken down months ago. The wind pulled at her braid, flinging it behind her like a lash. She didn't lift her hand to stop it. Let it sting. Let it remind her she was still here, that there was something left in her bones. A hawk circled above its shadow, gliding silent across the ground. Clara paused, watching it with a kind of envy. That bird wasn't shackled by name or memory. It didn't carry a past that preceded it into every room. It lived by instinct and hunger, and no one whispered behind its wings. Her stomach twisted. She placed a hand over it, half to still the ache, half to remember what it meant to feel. The Keating Ranch looked empty. No sign of movement. Just land and sky and the low murmur of distant cattle. Still, she knew better than to assume no one was watching. A place like this didn't survive without a careful eye. She pushed open the gate. It creaked like a warning, and stepped through, boots crunching over gravel. Her breath slowed. One step, another. Every sound felt louder here. A crow cawed from a nearby post. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of horse and dust and something she couldn't name. Not rot. Not exactly, but something old and heavy. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for. Work, maybe. Shelter. A night in the barn, if nothing else. Just long enough to gather her strength and keep moving west. Clara stopped near the corral. A horse turned to look at her, ears twitching, eyes calm but wary. She reached out slowly. It didn't bolt. That was more grace than most people had shown her lately. She heard the crunch of boots before she saw him. A tall figure stepped from the shadows of the barn. Wide shoulders, sun-creased skin, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, eyes steady, hand resting near his belt. Not threatening, not welcoming either. Her voice came out dry and hoarse. "I ain't here to steal." He didn't blink. "Then why are you here?" She could have lied, could have told him she was passing through. But she was tired of lying. "I need work. Or rest. Just a place to stand for a while without the ground giving way." He studied her for a long moment, gaze flicking to the coat, the boots, the scar near her brow. She waited for him to turn her away like all the rest. Instead, he nodded toward the barn. "Got some stalls that need mucking. You up for that?" Clara swallowed. "Yes." "Then get to it. We'll talk after." He turned and disappeared back into the barn's shadows. She followed, not because she trusted him, but because something in his voice hadn't flinched when he looked at her. That alone felt like mercy. Subscribe to watch hope grow from ashes. The barn smelled of horses and hay sweat and wood long soaked with labor. The shadows inside were cooler than the sun-blasted yard, and Clara felt the heat slide from her skin like a second layer of shame. She didn't look at the man again. He'd handed her a pitchfork and pointed toward the far stall, then walked off without another word. She set to work. The straw was damp and clung to the floorboards like sorrow. Her arms ached almost immediately. She hadn't done heavy work in weeks, but she clenched her jaw and drove the fork beneath the mess. Each lift sent a pulse through her shoulders, each toss a cloud of dust and memory into the air. By the time the stalls were clean, dusk had settled over the ridgeline. The sky had softened from cruel blue to a muted lavender, the kind that made the land look older and lonelier. Clara leaned against the stall gate, breathing hard. Sweat had soaked through the back of her shirt, and her palms were raw where the wood had bitten in. The man returned carrying a tin plate and a cup of water. He passed them to her without ceremony. "Name's Elias Keating," he said. She nodded. "Clara Bellamy." He didn't blink at the name, didn't flinch like others did. He just said, "You work quiet. I've learned it's safer." Elias leaned against the barn post, arms crossed, gaze unreadable. "They talk in town. Say you got a knack for trouble." Clara didn't answer right away. She chewed the cold beans on the plate, swallowed hard, then looked him in the eye. "They've been talking since I was 13. I stopped listening at 15. He didn't nod, didn't frown, just stood there like a tree the storm had decided to spare. "That your coat?" he asked after a moment. She glanced down. "No, my brother's. He died. A beat passed. Sorry." He was the only one who never left. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was the kind that folded over them like a shared blanket. Elias reached down and picked at a splinter on the post. The gesture was small, but something about it, gentle, almost nervous, softened the set of his jaw. "You looking to stay long?" he asked. Clara took a sip of water. "Don't know yet. Most places don't let me. I ain't most places." It was almost too much the way he said it, not with kindness, but with plain truth. Like he wasn't offering her pity, just facts. She nodded once. "Then I'll stay until you say otherwise." He stepped back from the post, pushed his hat lower on his brow. "You can sleep in the tack room. Ain't much, but it's dry. I've had worse." He gave the smallest twitch of a smile, barely there, then turned to go. At the door he paused. "Sun's up early. Work starts with it. I'll be ready." When she was alone again, Clara sank down into the straw. Her body throbbed in quiet rebellion, but her mind had stilled. For the first time in months she wasn't running. She wasn't begging. She was working. And someone had looked her in the eye and seen more than the rumors. Outside, the wind shifted again, curling through the broken slats of the barn. It was colder now, but Clara didn't shiver. She pulled her brother's coat tight and let herself lean against the wall. She hadn't dared to hope in a long time. But maybe, just maybe, this place hadn't decided what to make of her yet. The tack room was no larger than a jail cell and smelled of old leather and smoke, but it was hers for the night, and that was more than she'd had in a long while. Clara laid the saddle blanket on the floor and curled her body around her satchel, which held nothing but a locket, a flint, and a letter she'd never dared to send. Sleep came in fits haunted by half-formed dreams and the ache in her limbs. But when the rooster called and the sky began to blush with morning, she was on her feet before the barn stirred. She washed her face at the trough and tied her braid back with a strip of rawhide. Elias was already out in the yard splitting wood. His axe rose and fell in a rhythm that spoke of years spent carving survival out of silence. He glanced up once just enough to nod, then returned to the log beneath him. He didn't need to ask if she was ready. By mid-morning they were side by side in the fields mending fence posts that had cracked in the last storm. The work was slow, blistering, and filled with small silence. But it was real. It was honest. "You from the plains?" Elias asked, not looking up from the splintered rail he was replacing. "South of Laramie," Clara said, tightening the wire with raw fingers. "Used to be sheep country. Used to be." He spoke the words like a man who understood loss not in theory but in shape and weight. A gust of wind lifted the dust around them. Clara paused, squinting toward the hills. "This land feels like it's holding its breath." Elias leaned on his hammer. "It's been waiting on rain for 4 months. That the only thing it's waiting on." He looked at her then, eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. "Maybe not." Neither spoke for a while. As the days passed, something changed between them. Not in grand gestures or clumsy confessions, but in the small ways people build trust without meaning to. Elias started setting aside coffee for her before sunrise. Clara began sharpening his tools without being asked. He never asked her about the scars, and she didn't ask why he had a limp on rainy mornings. They just worked. Ate. Sat under the same moonlight saying little. One night after fixing a broken water line, Clara found him sitting on the back step of the ranch house tuning an old fiddle. His fingers moved slow but certain. He caught her watching and handed her the instrument. "You play." She hesitated. "Used to." She cradled the fiddle like a memory. The first note came shaky, the second truer. The tune that came was not one of joy or mourning, but something in between, a waltz for the half-broken things that refused to stay buried. When she finished, Elias's voice was low. "That was my mother's song." She sang it while the roof caved in. Clara looked down at the fiddle. "I learned it from my brother. The last night before he left for war." Another silence. Another thread woven between them. Days turned to weeks. The land stayed dry, but her heart did not. She found herself watching Elias more, how he stooped to mend a lamb's twisted leg, how he stood when the preacher rode by, how he never turned from her gaze. One morning, while cleaning the harness room, she found a drawer of letters, yellowed and worn. She didn't read them, but the handwriting on the envelope matched the one in her satchel. Later that evening she asked, "You ever been east?" Elias shrugged. "Once. Didn't like the way people looked at you, like they already knew your worth." "I know that look. I figured." He handed her a mug of strong coffee. "You thinking of heading back that way?" She shook her head slowly. "There's nothing left east of here but ghosts." Elias sipped from his own mug, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Then maybe it's time to start looking west." In the warmth of the firelight, with his boots propped beside hers, the silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like home being built one moment at a time. The clouds came in low the next week, not with rain, but with trouble. Clara had ridden into town to trade eggs and cured meat for flour. The general store was quiet, but the moment she stepped through the door, the hush turned heavier. Faces turned. Some looked away. Others didn't bother. Behind the counter stood Henry Welch, all sharp chin and sharper tongue. He glanced at her basket, then at her face. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts, Miss Bellamy." "I'm just here to trade, same as anyone," she said, steady as she could manage. A woman near the shelves whispered something to her husband. Clara heard the word sinner run away Elias's place, and her cheeks burned, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that if you gave them the tremble, they'd take the whole spine. Welch leaned forward, voice low. Folks talk, Clara, about how you turn up like bad luck, about the preacher's wife who said you poisoned her dog, about the man in Fair Creek who went missing after you passed through. Her jaw tightened. The preacher's dog got into rat poison, and that man never spoke more than 5 words to me. He sneered. Stories follow you like flies. Maybe they got a reason. Clara set the basket down harder than she meant to. You want to trade or not? He took the eggs, dropped the flour into the sack without a word, then leaned close enough she could smell the rot on his breath. You tell Elias Keating he's keeping a bad seed under his roof. She didn't respond, just turned and walked out, the sack heavy in her arms, her steps light from spite alone. Outside, the sky pressed down thick and gray. Back at the ranch, Elias met her at the gate. He saw her face and said nothing, just reached for the sack. She held it tight. They're talking, she said. Saying I'm poison. Saying you're blind. He didn't blink. Let 'em talk. You should know what they're saying. I know what I see. His hand brushed hers. Not soft. Not tender. Just there, real solid, certain. But it wasn't that simple. 2 nights later, a fire started in the southern pasture. Elias and Clara rode hard to stop it, stamping flames with blankets and shoveling dirt by the armful. When the blaze finally died, Elias's face was smeared with soot, and Clara's hair was singed at the ends. They sat in the ash, breathing heavy. That fire wasn't natural, she muttered. No, it was lit. She looked at him. You think they'd do this just to drive me out? I think folks do worse if they thought it would keep their pride clean. The wind howled low through the burnt grass like a warning. That night, Elias didn't sleep. Clara saw the flicker of lamplight from the porch long after midnight. The next morning, he told her to ride into the canyon and check the northern fence. Alone. She didn't ask why. It took most of the day to reach the spot and circle back. When she returned, she found a note pinned to the tack room door in a nail she didn't recognize. This land don't need your kind. Get gone, or we'll burn more than grass next time. She crumpled it, throat dry. Inside the barn, Elias was wiping down a bridle. She held out the paper. He read it once, then again. His hand tightened, jaw flexing. I can go, she said, her voice even. Won't hold it against you. Elias looked at her a long while. You could, but you won't. No, because you ain't running anymore. Her lip trembled just once. Let them come, he said. We've got fire of our own. He didn't mean matches. And she believed him. They came the next night. Clara had just finished scraping the supper plates clean when the dogs barked low and mean, deep in the throat, the way animals do when they sense what men pretend not to. Elias stood from the table, rifle already in hand, before she even reached the door. 3 men rode up slow under a silver moon, their shadows long across the yard. One wore a preacher's hat, the second a sheriff's badge that hadn't meant anything in years, and the third, well, the third Clara knew. His name was Merle Danton, and his lies had once nearly cost her a noose. He was grinning. Evenin', Elias, Merle called, voice slick as creek stone. Didn't mean to interrupt your supper, but seems you've taken in a woman with a rather colorful past. Elias stepped onto the porch. She's not yours to question. Merle chuckled. See, that's where you're wrong. She left some unfinished business back in Fair Creek. Ought to come with us nice and quiet. That way nobody has to get messy. Clara stepped up beside Elias, heart banging like a drum behind her ribs. Whatever they told you, it ain't true. Merle, he's the one who tried. He raised a hand. Now, Clara. Let's not dredge up old fictions. Elias's voice dropped low. She's not going anywhere. The preacher spat in the dirt. You'd protect her over your neighbors, your name? I'd protect what's right. The three men shifted in their saddles. Hands hovered near holsters. The air turned thick with waiting. Clara felt the fear rise, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped off the porch and into the moonlight toward them. Each footfall was slow, deliberate. You want me, she said? Come take me. But you'll have to say it out loud. Tell Elias what I did. Tell him why you're really here. Merle's grin slipped. The sheriff looked away. You can't, Claire said. 'Cause if you do, he'll know the truth. That I said no to you. That you raised a hand and I raised a bottle. That you told the law I'd seduced you and they believed it 'cause I wore a low dress and my brother was already in the ground. Silence. Elias looked at Merle, then at the others. That true? Merle didn't answer. But the preacher backed his horse up. Get off my land, Elias said, his voice sharp as barbed wire. Still the men didn't move. Not until the barn door creaked and 5 ranch hands stepped out, each armed, each with eyes that had seen hard things and stood through them. Elias had called them quietly in the days after the fire. The preacher swallowed. The sheriff cursed under his breath. Merle turned his horse. This ain't over. It is for you, Elias said. And they rode off, hooves pounding into the distance. Clara stood frozen, chest heaving. Elias laid a hand on her shoulder. You did good. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thought maybe you'd send me off? He shook his head. You're not what they say. I know who you are. You sure? He turned her gently toward the porch. I'm sure enough to ask you to stay. Not just for a season. For good. She stared at him, breath caught. Build this place together, he said. Make something they can't tear down with talk. A soft sound left her throat. Half laugh. Half sob. She didn't answer in words. Just leaned into him, forehead against his chest as the wind rustled through the dry grass, and the dogs settled near the steps. It was over. And something else, something quieter, stronger, had just begun. Subscribe to follow lives not yet finished. The next weeks passed not like a sunrise swift and blazing, but like a seed beneath the earth, slow, invisible, steady. Clara found her place on the ranch not as a guest, not as a worker, but as someone who belonged. She rose before the sun with Elias, brewed the coffee-mended saddles, and helped birth calves with bare hands, and whispered comfort. The land didn't ask for her past, it only asked for sweat. Elias changed too. She noticed it in the way he let silence stretch longer, not as a wall but a bridge. He spoke more about his brother who died crossing the Snake River and about the father who drank away the family's cattle one winter and left Elias to carry the name back from ash. He spoke of dreams once held about building a schoolhouse near the ridge, bringing books and music to a place that had known only storms. Clara listened, her hands busy with thread or grain, her eyes soft. And when she told him finally about the child she'd lost, how the fever took him before the church would even baptize him, Elias didn't flinch or look away. He just sat beside her on the porch, fingers grazing hers, and watched the wind ripple through the tall grass. It was enough, but the town didn't forget. Whispers still came. A letter arrived unsigned with one sentence, "He deserves better than you." She burned it in the stove before Elias could see. Still doubt crept in like a fox in the henhouse. Some nights Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, asking herself if she had truly left the old Clara behind or if she was just hiding her deeper now. Then came the morning. Elias handed her a wrapped bundle at breakfast. Rough cloth tied with a piece of saddle string. She unwrapped it and blinked. A book. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. Inside, scrawled in his careful handwriting, "You are not your bruises, Clara Bellamy. You are the fire that healed around them." She pressed her fingers to the page, breath-catching. "I thought maybe," he said, eyes low, "you'd read it to me sometime. If you're staying." Her voice came raw. "I'm not going anywhere." He reached into his pocket, then slow, unsure, drew out a simple silver ring. No gem, no polish, just a worn band that looked like it had waited years to be worn again. "It was my mother's," he said. "She used to say, love wasn't loud. It was weather always there, even when you didn't see it." Clara stared down at it. Her hands trembled not from fear but from the weight of gentleness after years of none. "You don't need to answer now," Elias added. "Only if you want to build something here, with me." She took the ring, slipped it on. No storm came. No ghost rose up. Only the soft thump of hooves outside and the long shadows of the barn leaning eastward. "I want it," she whispered. "All of it. The land, the work, you." And that was enough. Later that spring they stood before a handful of neighbors and friends, wildflowers in Clara's braid, Elias in a clean shirt he hated. They made no vows they didn't mean. Just promised to stay when it got hard and forgive when it got harder. That night, beneath the same stars that once watched her wander, Clara sat beside Elias on the porch and laid her hand on her belly where something small and quiet had begun to grow. A new name, a new story. The wind was softer now. It carried hope and the faint scent of rain.